into a hate crime instantly. And a statement said could turn into a life lost so quickly. So when something happens, take action, report incidents. You have saw Brother Nabizadeh here, I'm here. Anybody, raise your voice, please. Because we're seeing that small incidents of hate that was just lurking around the surface has now turned into a state-sanctioned annihilation of an entire population. So when this idea for this event was pitched to me, I was so moved. I was like, yes, let's do this. We need to inform our communities. We need to talk about it. We need to get some amazing individuals here who are experts on subject matter and have them speak about this. So I want to talk about the person who pitched the idea and whose brainchild this is. Sister Fatma Zohra is a board member of CARE San Diego and an amazing community member. You'll see her everywhere. She's an amazing personality. She's so bubbly. So I'm going to put her on the spot and call her on right now. Fatma.
Thank you, Sister Tazeen. Am I supposed to continue with this mic, Brother Host, or do you have a better one for me? Because while we do this, as Sister Tazeen said, okay, as Sister Tazeen mentioned, my name is Fatma. I am on the board of CARE San Diego. It is my honor and privilege to be here tonight with all of you hosting such an esteemed panel. First of all, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank CARE to support this idea. Also IMC, they've done all the behind the scene work. It was high time that we brought this issue to the mainstream and did what we could in our capacity to educate the community, raise awareness around the issue. I wanted to take this time to also thank CARE San Diego because they helped me gather the esteemed panel that we have tonight. I also know that you guys came here to hear from them and not from me. So without further ado, I'm going to start bringing the speakers up on the stage so we can get on with the program. You will notice that we have index cards and pens on the table. Use those to take notes if you have any questions that come to mind. In general, or for a particular speaker, as we go through the event tonight, write them down, and inshallah, at the end of the panel, we'll direct those questions to those speakers. As you can see on the flyer, we have 6 speakers tonight. We're gonna make this into a panel discussion type of thing and not really a speech because you've already heard plenty of speeches. First off, I would like to start introducing the speakers and bring them one by one. We will have one speaker join us through Zoom because some urgent work came up last minute and she was not able to join us, but she is taking the time and she will be part of the panel as promised. Give me a second. The first panelist that will join us tonight is Dr. Samina Salim. Dr. Samina Salim is an associate professor in the Department of Pharmacological and Pharmaceutical Sciences, College of Pharmacy, University of Houston. She holds a PhD from the Aligarh Muslim University and was later trained at the Karolinska Institute, Stockholm, Sweden. She joined University of Houston in 2004 as a research faculty member and quickly moved up the ranks to become a tenured associate professor in 2017. She leads a productive research program funded by the National Institute of Minority Health Disparities and University of Houston's internal funding mechanisms. Her lifelong goal is to study and advance an approach that situates the topic of health from vantage points of basic neuroscience, ethnic and racial contexts of society. Samina is the author of more than 80 peer-reviewed publications with an accomplished record of scholarship and professional service. She currently serves as a Fulbright specialist, plays an active role in student mentoring activities, and has mentored a number of graduate and undergraduate students who have all moved on to have successful careers. In addition to her scientific pursuits, Samina has authored more than 30 op-eds. She serves on the advisory board of many nonprofit organizations. She is the founding president of Alex Care, a Texas-based 501c3 nonprofit organization which delivers cancer support to the underserved communities in India. Apart from her professional commitments and social causes, she writes poetry, enjoys classical Indian music, and cherishes friendships and loves traveling. Please give a big hand for Samina. Samina, would you join us on the stage, please? Asma, can you give her a hand? While Samina is getting situated, what we want to do is sort of, give her like a chance to express why she cares for the cause, why she decided to join us tonight. And then inshallah, we'll move on to our round 2 of discussions.
Good evening. Thank you, Fatma. Thank you, Care. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's my true pleasure and honor to be here. So I'm an Indian American Muslim. I was born in the city of Lucknow, raised in Aligarh, a predominantly Muslim city of India. I spent my early formative years in a Catholic convent where most of my friends were Hindus, with whom I celebrated Eid and Diwali, Ramadan and Raksha Bandhan. I got my PhD from the Aligarh Muslim University, one of the premier institutions of India. Then I went to Europe to do my postdoctoral studies and eventually settled down in the United States. So to my American friends and colleagues, I have always proudly declared my Indian heritage. I sort of selected a role for myself of a cultural ambassador, someone who represented the composite culture of and the values of India. I sort of felt that I represented those of you who speak Urdu and Hindi, that I was the embodiment of the Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, that I was the embodiment of what India was. Pay attention. I said what India was. I am not proud of what India is today, sadly. Because how can I represent an India where Muslim girls and Muslim women are stripped of their head covering, which is part of their clothing, in the middle of the streets before they step into their schools and colleges? How can I represent an India where Muslim women are sold on an app and on other online platforms? I do not represent this India, where Muslim women are raped, killed, and burned alive. I am not proud of that India. This is an India I did not grow up in. This is an India that I do not identify with. So the question is, how has India descended to this level? The question of why is much more complex, and I would leave that to the esteemed panelists, the historians in the panel to discuss. The question of why is, to me, it's perhaps rooted in the sad history of the partition of India. But what boggles my mind is that this perpetuation and continuity of hate to the generations that never even saw the partition of India, who were born after 1947. So I'm honored to be here to discuss some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Samina. We look forward to hearing more from you. The next member that I'm really thrilled to introduce to you all is Pieter. Pieter Friedrich is a freelance journalist specializing in analysis of affairs in South Asia, with a particular focus on the rise of the Hindu nationalist movement. He has spent the past 16 years working alongside the Indian diaspora throughout North America and Europe. He is the author of several books on various issues related to human rights in the subcontinent. His work touches on both historical and current events regarding India's Hindu nationalist movement, as well as on the activities of Hindu nationalist outfits abroad, especially in the US. He has spoken alongside and/or been cited by parliamentarians from Australia, Germany, and the UK, and his journalism has influenced various congressional races throughout the US. Please put your hands together for Pieter. Yeah.
Thank you for that introduction, Fatima. And good evening to everybody. I'm Pieter Friedrich. I'm the author of Captivating the Simple-Hearted, A Struggle for Human Dignity in the Indian Subcontinent. I'm the author of Saffron Fascists, India's Hindu Nationalist Rulers. Author of Sikh Caucus, Siege in Delhi, Surrender in Washington, published last year. And I am the author, most recently, came out this week, of a short book, India at a Crossroads, Hindu Nationalist Efforts to Eradicate Christianity. So, for the past 5 years, if you could next slide, please. Most of my work has been focused on the Hindu nationalist movement in India, specifically the RSS, which you can see behind me, which is the fountainhead and the proverbial mothership, if any of you are science fiction fans, of that movement. Now, let me give you just a quick rundown of some of what I worked on since 2019. Next slide, please. In 2019, I published a cover article for India's Caravan magazine about Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard and her ties to the RSS BJP in India, as well as her links, her ties to their affiliates here in the US. And I published that as she was running for president here in the US. My article was affirmed by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, a DC-based watchdog. My article also heavily emphasized Gabbard's involvement with this organization called the Overseas Friends of the BJP. The Overseas Friends of the BJP is the US wing of India's ruling Hindu nationalist BJP. And as you can see here, she was posing in August of 2014 with the head of that group, who is an Indian politician, and wearing the colors of the BJP. That scarf is the colors of the BJP. That took place in Atlanta. Well, next slide, please. About a year after my article came out, the OFBJP, Overseas Friends of the BJP, after nearly 30 years in operation here in the US, was registered as a foreign agent in the US. Next slide, please. My article was also affirmed by Congressman Ro Khanna from up in the Bay Area, and that sparked a huge debate within the South Asian American community about the influence of Hindutva, that is Hindu nationalism, within American politics. Next slide, please. Congressman Khanna's statement also led to a real-world protest against me by the American wing of the RSS, known as the HSS, that happened up in Congressman Khanna's district. It was one of many attacks that I've faced in the US by Hindu nationalist sympathizers. Next, please. And my work drew a lot more attention after I spoke, and many people that I meet on the road know me from this, after I spoke at Houston City Council in 2019, when Indian Prime Minister Modi, an RSS member himself, visited the city. Even months later, as you can see, this is from 2020, Indian media was still talking about it. Now, next slide, please. In 2019, Germany's ambassador to India was the first diplomat in the world to visit the RSS and meet its chief. My journalism turned the issue into an international controversy that was covered around the world. This is just a couple of clippings. That's from Germany. This is from France. There was coverage around it all over the world. Next slide, please. Last year, The US ambassador to India also met the RSS. And I was the only journalist to cover it. Next slide, please. But after months of journalism and sustained demands from the Indian American diaspora that he resigned due to the meeting with the RSS, he quietly left the Foreign Service in January, despite having 28 years in service. Next slide, please. In 2020, I began exposing the RSS BJP ties of Sri Preston Kulkarni, a candidate for Congress in Houston, Texas. And the local diaspora picked up on it and began a campaign with it, ran with it. And despite what seemed like a guaranteed victory for this guy, who was a Foreign Service veteran, he was catastrophically defeated. Next slide, please. I've continued to write about various other American political candidates and elected officials and their links, their ties, their interactions with the RSS BJP, especially with their RSS BJP affiliates here in the US. And these are just a few quick highlights of my projects over the past 3 years. And thanks to my relentless efforts to expose the RSS BJP agenda in India and abroad, I was named in a press conference by Delhi police a year ago, and I'm now presumably and sadly banned from India. But I do take it as a marker of, God willing, some small level of my success. So thank you.
Thank you, Pieter. Our next panelist is Rohit. Rohit Chopra is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at Santa Clara University. His research examines the relationship between globalization, media, and politics, with a strong focus on how Hindu right-wing communities use the internet to promote their vision of Indian identity. Extensively published, he is the author, most recently, of The Gita for a Global World, Ethical Action in an Age of Flux, and The Virtual Hindu Rashtra, Saffron Nationalism and New Media. Rohit also writes regularly in a range of media publications on politics, culture, and social issues. He is the co-founder and co-host of the India Explained podcast. Please give a warm welcome to Rohit.
Thanks very much, Fatma, and thanks to everyone for the kind invitation and for making time to be here. So I'll just, share a few remarks about, my interest in this topic and, why I might be here. I've been studying the Hindu right online for about 20 years. And before I came to graduate school in the US, I used to work in the Indian internet industry, and I actually saw I saw the presence of this movement online, and I thought there was something there. But I never anticipated that the Hindu right in India and the global Hindu right would mobilize the internet and social media to such devastating effect. So that's one sort of interest I have. And then the second thing, as Dr. Salim pointed out, also is the India I see now in the news, the India I hear about, and the India that comes to me in WhatsApp forwards is very different from the India I grew up in. So there's a couple of things that I'm particularly interested in. One, from a very practical point of view, I think it's really important to raise this issue, to bring it to awareness in the global community, and particularly to talk about the role of social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp in fomenting anti-Muslim violence and anti-Muslim sentiment. Facebook has admitted its role in genocide against the Rohingya in Myanmar. They've admitted their role in anti-Muslim violence in Sri Lanka. In the Indian context, they've hired people who are from the Hindu right. And when the government has pushed back, they have sort of fallen in line. It's the same with Twitter. Now, these companies in Silicon Valley, where I teach and I live in San Francisco, their mottos are "Don't be evil, we want to build community." So I think one really needs to hold them accountable for that. And an interesting question for me, which applies to any minority anywhere in the world, is whose lives really matter? Whose lives are grievable? Right? Whose suffering matters? And then I'll just end with one other thought, that Hindu nationalism or Hindutva is part of the landscape of Hinduism, but it doesn't exhaust Hinduism. And one of the claims that Hinduism makes, part of the self-definition of Hinduism, and this is a claim that actually Hindu right-wingers, Hindu extremists also make, right? Even as they abuse minorities or critics, they talk about how Hinduism is tolerant and inclusive and pluralistic. And that too is part of the heritage of Hinduism. So the question I have is, the challenge is that, Hindus everywhere need to make good on that, right? Stand up for this and speak up against this really poisonous variant of Hindu nationalism that threatens to, I think, destroy not just the wonderful civilization and ethos that is India, but really a lot of communities everywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. Next, we have Angana. Angana Chatterjee is co-chair of the Political Conflict, Gender and People's Rights Initiative, Center for Race and Gender, University of California, Berkeley. Since April 2017, she has been a research fellow at the Center for Human Rights and International Justice, Stanford University. A cultural anthropologist, Dr. Chatterjee focuses her work on issues of political conflict, majoritarian nationalism, religion in the public sphere, and reparatory justice and cultural survival. In Kashmir, Dr. Chatterjee co-founded and co-convened between 2008 and 2012, the People's Tribunal on Human Rights and Justice. Her collaborative work investigating the unknown, unmarked, and mass graves in Kashmir called international attention to the need for accountability to the victims and the families of the disappeared. Dr. Chatterjee's recent scholarship is focused on political violence and coloniality in Kashmir, prejudicial citizenship in India, and the delimits of absolute nationalism. And concurrently, her research also focuses on questions of belonging and legacies of conflict across South Asia. Dr. Chatterjee has numerous publications, too many for me to list here. I encourage everybody to go on the Berkeley website and look her up. She will be joining us via Zoom. Take it away, Angana.
Thank you so much, Fatima. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Angana, you can talk now.
Hello?
You're up.
Can you hear me? Hello? 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 I don't think anyone can hear me right now. I'm not sure what's going on. I can hear you.
While we wait for Angana to join, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our next speaker, and we'll come back to Angana. Our next speaker today is Khaled Beydoun. Professor Khaled Beydoun is a law professor, author, and public intellectual. He serves as a law professor at Wayne State University, a scholar in residence at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University, and associate director of the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights in Detroit. Professor Beydoun is author of the critically acclaimed book, American Islamophobia, Understanding the Roots and Rise of Fear, and co-editor of Islamophobia and the Law, published by University of Cambridge Press. Professor Beydoun's academic work has been featured in top academic journals, including the UCLA Law Review, Northwestern Law Review, the California Law Review.
You don't gotta read all.
Okay, too much. Please put your hands together for Khaled Beydoun.
Can you guys hear me? I'm from Detroit, so I'm really loud. It's really exciting to be here in San Diego. I'm going to be really brief. I'm really excited to engage in this conversation about an issue that I feel is really neglected in the media sphere. Just one quick remark before we transition on, because I know you guys are waiting on dinner. It's impossible not to juxtapose what's taking place in places like India with what's unfolding in real time right now in the Ukraine. And what I want to raise in this discussion is the fact that in addition to Islamophobia, in addition to Hindu supremacy, we have another issue that is expanding on a global stage, which is white supremacy, right? There's a reason why Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees resonate so strongly when we see them on television. However, when we see brown and black individuals who are fleeing crisis, fleeing war-torn countries, they don't get a sliver of coverage. They don't get a scintilla of the attention that Ukrainians have received in 2 weeks. So for me as a critical race theorist, it's really pivotal, it's really salient that we center white supremacy as a system that intersects and interacts with Islamophobia, Hindu supremacy, and other forms of bigotry that we're seeing unravel on a global stage. I'm going to stop there, but I'm really excited to hear from my co-panelists, and then inshallah engage in a Q&A with all of you while we eat some of this good food. Thank you so much.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes? Can someone put up their hand if you can hear me? Perfect, thank you. Right now, before I could hear you, you couldn't hear me. Now you can hear me, but I can't hear you. So I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I'm really grateful to be on this panel with people whose work I very much admire. Because of the tuning in situation being what it is, Fatima very kindly asked me to offer some remarks, which I will do. And I'm hoping that conditions will permit me to continue being part of the conversation. And Fatima, thank you so very much for all your kindness in getting me here today. India is subsumed in a momentous political crisis, the most daunting since 1950. The practice of illiberal democracy today is accompanied by the call to fascism and the extermination of Muslims. In December 21, at a religious assembly, attendees took a collective oath to turn India into a Hindu state. At a gathering in Haridwar, considered a sacred place for Hindus, spiritual leaders and activists justified genocidal violence and the ethnocide of Muslims, provoking Hindus to take up weapons to participate in this cleaning campaign, just like in Myanmar. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who heads India's Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party government, did not denounce the expressions of hate there or elsewhere. Critical elections just concluded in 5 states in India this week, including in its most popular state and political nerve center, Uttar Pradesh. The election there in particular illustrated the majoritarian nationalism that is driving widespread and lethal aggression against Muslims across the country. There, Hindu nationalists have called for mass violence. The re-elected head of state, Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, is a Hindu nationalist demagogue from the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, increasingly positioned as Narendra Modi's legatee. The BJP continues the government's militarized rule of and colonial posture toward Kashmir. And across India, militant campaigns promote a conspiracy theory that Muslim men are marrying Hindu women to imperil and overpower Hindu culture. A new law premised on that belief is poised to override the rights of Muslims and other minority communities. The BJP manifests caste oppression in the violent relation of dominant caste-privileged Hindus to Adivasis and Dalits, supports forcible conversions of Christians to Hinduism, prescribes cattle slaughter, and prohibits Muslim women's right to wear the hijab. The amplification of the reach of state power over minority lives has propelled an unabating emergency wherein the Indian government has exceeded its authority. Extreme xenophobia in India today organizes Islamophobia as ostracization and racialism denigrate Indian Muslims as the enemy of Hindus. The rule of law is subverted through pervasive securitization and an authoritarian arbitrariness that operates in the name of national well-being, spurring immense social and political violence and new forms of partition. The political blueprint of Hindu nationalists signals an illiberal turn, an absolute nationalism that unchecked may enkindle the would-be erasure of Muslims in India. Prejudicial laws that weaponize citizenship in India exemplifies this headway to totalitarianism by Hindu nationalists. A pivotal objective of the BJP government has been to alter the basis of Indian citizenship. The BJP's pilot implementation has focused on the state of Assam in the northeast, where injurious gendered impact on its sizable Muslim population is catastrophically evident. In Assam, the prospective destruction of Muslims is signified by the creation of detention camps. The citizenship experiment is scheduled for enforcement across the country and signals the onset of an inestimable catastrophe that might conceivably devastate millions of lives. I undertook research on this issue in 2021-22. And I wanted to, 2020-21, and I wanted to read you a fragment of a person's story. Please bear with me. January 29, 2020, a Muslim man committed suicide by hanging himself in the building of a primary school in Assam, where his 2 children study. He had been missing for days. Originally from another district in Assam, at the time of his death, he had been resident in his current village on the river islands, Char Islands, for several years. He had also worked in construction in Guwahati, the largest city in Assam, previously. On settling down in the Char, he commuted to Guwahati to work as a daily wage laborer, while his wife earned a living as an agricultural laborer in their village. Notwithstanding the hardships of life, in the words of his family, they felt truly blessed to have each other and their home. The protracted process of the National Registrar of Citizens to verify their family citizenship status was daunting and painful. As a non-formally literate person and someone without means, it had been extraordinarily difficult for him to navigate the bureaucratic obstacles, misinformation, and procedural requirements, and to locate and procure the requisite documents to establish his family's legacy as apposite citizens of Assam. Despite repeated verifications, his name and the name of one of his very young children were absent from the citizenship list published on August 31, 2019. The father of his spouse was also identified as a doubtful voter and omitted also from the National Registrar of Citizens. He could not fathom why he and his family and community were being estranged from their homeland. His family was apprehensive that their being Muslims and the multiple local migrations necessitated by poverty had cast them as people without roots and therefore as foreigners. He began to experience mental health issues which escalated with loss of income, debt, anxiety, increasing depression, and severe stress. He lived with foreboding about his future and that of his family. He started to consume alcohol in excess and was easily angered. At one time, he attempted to break their home down with an axe. He had consumed pesticide to kill himself at another time and tried to hang himself. She, his wife, used to watch over him all the time. Just before his death, he had rowed with her. His family lived through a vortex of threat, sadness, humiliation, and deprivation. They were uneasy about the trials of the foreigners' tribunal process, in which they felt increasingly prejudged. Exhausted, they withdrew from various aspects of collective social life. They feared for his well-being and the impact his deterioration was having on his children. Then, one day, he took his life. With his death, fragments of hope and history were irreparably broken for his family. I would like to end with one thought. It may be noted that the Myanmar military crafted a citizenship law in 1982, dismantling the citizenship rights of the Rohingya. And in hindsight, a study of the Nuremberg laws instituted in Nazi Germany in September 1935 reveals the escalation through law of a process against minorities targeting their right to belong within a nation state that culminated in genocide. Thank you.
reasons that we wanted to be here. So if you could actually take these philosophies and connect it and sort of give us an awareness on what we need to do.
A new Muslim governing board. So literally in France, we could say that Macron is the new Mufti of France. And that's a particular type of structure. Then we have Muslim majority Islamophobia, where good Muslim, bad Muslim, according to Sisi and some of the other different countries, defining who is a good Muslim and bad Muslim is in essence using all types of ways, including funding Islamophobes in this country and in Europe to craft the identity of what a good Muslim and a bad Muslim. Fourth is the social media Islamophobia. The social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. And the nature of it is transnational and instantaneous. And literally it's outside of government control, even though that it works with government. The fifth zone is the genocide zone, where Muslims face genocidal policies. So you have Myanmar, you have the Rohingya, you have Palestine, you have Kashmir and India. These are genocide zones where communities face genocide. So those are 5 different zones. Each zone is approached differently, defined differently. The research requires different types. So we can't just use Islamophobia as a catch-all. Each one has its own requirements in order to understand the dynamics that are taking place. And many of these, at least in terms of the policies that are pursued, have a long-standing history. So if you want to understand Muslims in America, you just need to at least read the COINTELPRO operations that were directed at the Black Panther Party. You just need to actually look at the history, because some of these are just pulled up and say, bring plan number 16 and let's see if it works. So if we don't understand that dynamic, we begin to think that we're the only one or it's just something new, rather than have a long historical legacies. And hopefully we'll have some good discussion. Thank you.
Samina and Rohit. My first question will be to both of you, and then we'll continue the dialogue from there. Samina, what I wanted to ask you is, why this hysteria against Muslims in India? And Rohit, the question that I have for you is, how is the pattern of violence against Muslims and other groups taking place now different from the sectarian violence in India, that India has seen earlier?
All right, I'll go first. Yes. Rohit, if that's okay with you. So I think the first thing I want to point out is that India has become a hot incubator of conspiracy theories over the past few years. And as you know, I mean, conspiracy theorists and conspiracy theories, this is not a new concept. It's been there for a long time, and but thanks to the internet and social media, conspiracies have taken a new life, right? So history tells us of the dangers of these theories. The protocol of the elders of Zion led to extermination of 6 million Jews. That was a result of conspiracy theories. It was Radio Rwanda that propagated conspiracies against Tutsis, killing almost 1 million Tutsis. So the same type of ludicrous and dangerous conspiracy theories are flourishing in India now for quite some time. And these theories and false propaganda are being pushed by the Indian media, funded by the elite within the Indian political system and business class, endorsed in one way or the other by the state, sometimes by overlooking the propaganda, and at times supporting it, either directly or indirectly. I'm sure you remember the remarks of the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, during the Citizenship Amendment Act protest. What he said in a televised speech was that he can identify the protesters of the Citizenship Amendment Act by the clothes that they wear. So he was referring to the skull caps and hijabs. So what he was trying to suggest, that the only people who are upset with the Citizenship Amendment Act, the purpose of which is to deny citizenship to Indian Muslims, are only Muslims. I mean, for all he cares, Muslims are the ones that he wants gone, out of sight, right? So, I mean, this is the Prime Minister of India who's making these kinds of remarks. And then his Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah, his remarks, his Islamophobic remarks of calling Indian Muslims as termites, as terrorists, and this is very well known. And that, given a chance, he would be ready to throw out these termites any day, any time of the day. This is just published.
I'm going to interrupt you here. I want to jump to Rohit from here. Rohit, do you want to add to what Samina said? Like, how do you see this different from what we have seen up to now?
Thank you. So I just want to start by saying that, it's not as if India was a bastion of, in the Indian context, sectarian violence is called communalism. It's a very particular term used. So India has had a tradition of syncretism or shared identities. Historically, there have been many communities that actually at some point of time, there were communities that identified as both Muslim and Hindu. You would have communities or houses in which one child was raised as Hindu, one child was raised as Muslim, or one as Hindu and one as Sikh. Modern categories of identity don't necessarily allow this. So this is all true, but there were also tensions, and especially in the aftermath of partition, one of the problems that India dealt with was there was no framework in which India and Pakistan, I would say, and other South Asian nations could actually learn to talk about this violence. But there's a historian, Mukul Kesavan, who described it very well. He says, when you look at other parties, and the Congress party, which ruled India for most of its independent history, was also guilty of anti-minority violence, and they were responsible for a brutal anti-Sikh genocide in 1984, following the assassination of the Indian Prime Minister. He says the Congress is opportunistically sectarian or communal. The BJP is programmatically communal or sectarian. And that's an important difference. And I'll just share one other thing based on social media, which I've been monitoring. Almost immediately after Mr. Modi came to power, and it's important to note that he came, when he was first elected in 2014, as Prime Minister, when the BJP won very convincingly, he did not campaign on an anti-Muslim agenda at all. It was all development. The moment he became Prime Minister and the BJP came to power, vigilante Hindu groups, Hindu extremist groups took it as a pass to engage in routine violence, humiliation, and lynching of Muslims. What I've seen happen since then is the hallmark of being a good Hindu was you don't speak up against such violence. I want to say this is 2014 to 2018, right? If you speak up against the lynching, you're not a good Hindu, and therefore you're not a good Indian, because only a Hindu can really be an Indian. From there, we have now moved to a position where the hallmark of being a good Hindu and being a good Indian is actually endorsing this violence. Whether it is, forcing someone to shave their beard, whether it is ripping off a hijab, whether it is lynching someone, there's become this performance that this is now the way you be a good Hindu. So that to me is the change.
So I guess this would be a good point to jump into the role that BJP and RSS have played in India. And Pieter, I wanted to here, if you could, talk a little bit about what is the RSS, how powerful is it today, What views does the RSS take of minorities, and is it all Muslims that are affected, or are other minorities also under threat?
Yeah, so the RSS stands for Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which means National Volunteer Corps. And the RSS is kind of in process of setting India on fire today. And if they continue, the blaze is just going to grow larger and larger. The RSS stands for Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which means National Volunteer Corps. The RSS is the world's oldest, largest, and fastest growing fascist movement. The RSS was founded in 1925, which is exactly around the same time that the Nazis were coming to power in Germany. The Nazi Party was being formulated in Germany, that the Italian fascists were really being formulated in Italy. And in 1925 was also when Hitler was publishing Mein Kampf, and when Hitler was founding the SS. Now the RSS is it's a uniformed paramilitary organization. It's all male. It trains with weapons. It has, as one of the earlier speakers mentioned, about 50,000 chapters throughout the entire country, which meet on a daily basis. It has an estimated 6 million members, and I say estimated because it's a shadowy organization and they don't actually release their numbers. In addition to that, it has dozens of special interest subsidiary organizations. And some of the two most important I would mention would be VHP, which is the religious wing of the RSS, and the Bajrang Dal, which is the youth wing, the militant youth wing of the VHP. So it's this, I used the term earlier, mothership, like in science fiction, you have a big mothership and it sends out all the small motherships. The RSS is like that. It has all these special interest subsidiaries. So between RSS, VHP, and Bajrang Dal, these three major organizations, those put together have about 15 million members that are militant members throughout the entire country. Now, as far as how much power it has, it's formed in 1925. That's almost 100 years ago, and the RSS is soon to celebrate its centennial. The RSS today has Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a member. He actually began his public life within the RSS. He joined it at the age of 8 and then became a full-time worker, devoted his entire life to the group, I think at about the age of 25. It has the Home Minister of the country, Amit Shah, who's in charge of internal law and order. It has the President, Venkaiah Naidu. It has about 75% of the cabinet ministers in the entire national government hail from an RSS background to one extent or another. And I could go on about how much they've actually infiltrated over the years, the judiciary, the police forces, and the educational system, and a large number of other societal organizations. But I would say, suffice it to say, that the RSS today is essentially, you could say a shadow government, or you could actually say that it is the government, because the ruling Hindu nationalist BJP is actually the political wing of the RSS. It was founded by the RSS in 1980. The RSS basically controls and pulls the strings of the BJP. So the RSS today is basically the government of India.
Thank you, Peter.
The other question you had about minorities. Yes. So ideologically, the RSS is dedicated to this vision that India is, always has been, and always should be a Hindu nation reserved for Hindu people and only for Hindu people. The RSS has this idea that ideologically, all non-Hindu people in the country should be either eliminated or assimilated. They particularly view Muslims and Christians, actually, as, in their words, to put the exact quotes from the ideological founders of the RSS, they view Muslims and Christians as foreign elements, internal threats, and traitors. And they view them as traitors because they believe that in order to be a fully loyal, patriotic Indian, you have to be a Hindu. So if you're not a Hindu, your loyalty, your patriotism to the country is in question. So for Muslims and Christians, RSS views them as people to be eliminated. For all other non-Hindu groups, especially Sikhs and Buddhists, the RSS views them as Hindu. Although Sikhs, especially and Buddhists as well, will vociferously deny that they are Hindu. Sikhs in particular will say, no, we're an entirely different religion. And we actually founded ourselves in order to be a different religion from Hinduism. But the RSS views Sikhs and Buddhists as Hindus and seeks to impose that view upon them and to assimilate them into the Hindu fold.
Thank you, Pieter. From here, I want to jump to Khaled. How has the war on terror involving Hindu supremacy in India? And from there, I want to go to Dr. Bazian. If you could elaborate a little more on the nature of the Islamophobia, the brand of India's nature of Islamophobia.
Yeah, just really quickly. So it's critical to know that what's happening in India isn't entirely isolated. Obviously, the war on terror that was launched directly after the 9/11 terror attacks was not only an American project, it was a global project that was unfolding during a globalized moment, right? And it was an imperial project where the United States and four administrations since the initial administration, which spearheaded the war on terror, by virtue of spearheading and advancing this campaign on a global level, what it did is it legitimized the demonization of Muslims, right? So as a consequence of the post 9/11 moment, it was okay to label Muslims terrorists. It was okay to label the entire faith of Islam as an inherently and innately vile faith that was worthy, not only worthy of policing, but that was critical for every element of society, whether the state or societal actors, to sort of come together and police Muslims of all sorts, Muslim civic activity, Muslim cultural activity, and specifically Muslim religious activity. So the American and global war on terror did a couple of things that legitimized this demonization of Muslims as a categorically as terrorists. And then it accelerated, right? It intensified pre-existing and indigenous campaigns across the world, of which Hindu supremacy is one of them. We can look to France, for instance, where we have, secular populism being another mode of anti-Muslim campaign that was advanced by the war on terror. So the American war on terror, and it's critical to really highlight the fact the United States government and four administrations since, even liberal and democratic administrations like the Obama administration, had a mighty hand in emboldening and accelerating these anti-Muslim campaigns happening on a global scale, of which India, I believe, is one of the most ominous and nefarious.
So just thinking about definitions, Islamophobia is a type of racism that target Muslimness or expressions of Muslimness. That's just like a very short definition. Another definition that also Islamophobia is a type of racial discourse that sits at the crossroads of global North and global South. So just to think this in the back of your mind. When we talk about India's approach to Islamophobia, the structure is to remove the Muslims from the category of citizenship. Once you remove people from citizenship, then they no longer have political rights, civil rights, religious rights, and all the rights. So increasingly, India is using the stripping of citizenship as part of Islamophobic strategy. Again, for us in America, we understand that the Voting Rights Act in 1965 was an important threshold to actually change the racial dynamics in the United States, and we're still trying to get people to vote today. So we're not yet out of the woods, literally. India is using that. The second, and I think many of us need to understand, the replacement theory. Replacement theory, which has been developed in France, but I think the Hindu nationalists are using the same type of argument. Replacement theory that the Muslims who are coming to Europe, or the minorities are coming to Europe, or the Mexicans who are coming here to the United States are attempting to replace the white race. In a similar way, within the Hindu nationalists, that the Muslim populations that are there are attempting to replace Hinduism, and by doing a number of things, again, with love jihad is being one. So Muslims in India, when they marry a woman, or a woman marries a Muslim woman marrying outside of Islam, that they're not doing it for Valentine's Day. Muslims don't give chocolate, they give Molotov cocktails, right? So this love jihad argument, in essence, is denying Muslim agency in the personal relationship. So every Muslim who's marrying is part of this global jihad for the displacement theory. This is what you see in France, this is what you see in Europe, and this is something that we are seeing in India. It often ends up in lynching, where the social media becomes very important tool. You get a tweet or a Facebook post, and all of a sudden these thugs that are organized descend upon this woman and this man, and then end up in a lynching event that is taking place. So it's actually comes out from this displacement theory that is being positing relative to Muslims and engaging in that. The other thing is what we had a whole report is Islamophobia stalking bigotry in India. The notion of Islamophobic geography, right? And actually, when we did a survey here in the US, where Muslims feel safe, where Muslims feel anxiety in public space, Muslims actually, if you go to the airport, you feel anxiety because you know that you're being watched. That's part of Islamophobic atmosphere that you're living in. And similar in India, there is the geography of Islamophobia, right? Again, just it's important for us to do comparisons. A Black person in America, when they go to affluent parts of neighborhood, like some parts of San Diego, you know the police have their radar. A suspect is in the neighborhood rather than a human being. In the same way, this racial geography in India has a similar type, where Muslims' geography is actually mapped, and where Muslims feel to be included or excluded, and where the intensification of violence takes place toward Muslim subjects. So these are ways to examine the various ways Islamophobia in relations to India and what is occurring on the India. And I think Kashmir has to be dealt with in a much more robust way as a settler colonial project that is underway in Kashmir. We just had a Russell Tribunal on Kashmir in Bosnia, where we went in there to compare between what is taking place in Bosnia and what took place in Bosnia in 1992-95 and what is currently underway in Kashmir in a settler colonial. So the removal of Article 35 now is allowing for the displacement of Muslims in Kashmir in order to change the demographics, right? So that's another element relative to the specificity of Kashmir within the Indian context.
Thank you, Dr. Bazian. And I will come back to the Kashmir issue in a little bit, but first I wanted to address the title of today's event, right? And related to that title, I have a question for both Rohit and Dr. Bazian. Is the use of the term genocide warranted? Why and why not? And I guess, Dr. Bazian, for you, I want to ask you, like, is it now a time that we should talk about this term in front of India? Like, should that be a discourse that we should be having?
Professor Beydoun is the lawyer, so I speak with some trepidation. My background is not in law, but I did think, following this. Is that, yeah. So, following the very kind invitation to this event, I spent some time reading up on it. And from what I understand, the term genocide can be used when it can be proved that a state or non-state actors have a very specific, they engage in actions, or they have a very specific intent targeted at one particular community to commit violence or to exterminate them. Incitement to genocide is also a crime. It's also a crime. When you look at the statutes based on the tribunals in Rwanda that had to do with the Rwanda genocide and Yugoslavia, following that, and the Rome statutes, I believe, you don't actually have to commit genocide to be guilty of a crime under international humanitarian law, I guess. Incitement to commit genocide also counts, but you have to very clearly prove that intent, and that's where the challenge is. But very interestingly, it is acknowledged that sometimes this intent can be expressed in ways that are not direct, that are coded. And when I just look at this, speaking as a non-legal expert, and I will defer to what others on the panel have to say, when you just look at the kind of language that has been used, when you look at the open calls for annihilating, exterminating Muslims, and for anyone associated with Muslims, when you look at what happened in Assam, which was mentioned earlier, I was involved with a project along with a non-profit, just looking at the kinds of anti-Muslim messages that were circulating on Facebook in the context of Assam. Now, India is enormously diverse linguistically, 26 or 28 major languages, hundreds of dialects. What was very interesting is that anti-Muslim sentiment, there were particular local terms that were being used. There was no way Facebook's algorithm could pick those up, right? They were completely being bypassed, and this happens all the time. So to me, all of this cumulatively adds up to a kind of the possibility to make a case. Now, the invocation of genocide may be a double-edged sword, because once there is an acknowledgement that a genocide might happen, it is obligatory upon the international community to act. And we know this happened in Rwanda, where Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, was like, well, it's kind of genocide, it resembles genocide, but it's not really genocide. And later on, they apologize. So that is the other side of it, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I was just getting my notes from the Kashmir tribunal, just for us to relate on both in terms of Kashmir, but also India. And this was really recalling the international human rights law guided by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on Human Rights, other relevant human rights instruments, and the Vienna Declaration and the Program of Action. Article 3, the convention clarifies when the country with the contracting parties, the convention is required to act: 1, acts of genocide; conspiracy to commit genocide; direct and public incitement to commit genocide; attempt to commit genocide; and complicity in genocide. So when you speak about, often when we use the term genocide, we think that we're just going to the graveyard after the genocide have been committed. That's not what the Convention on Genocide actually speaks about. Any aspect of taking steps that would facilitate genocide could be subject for bringing a case. Now, understand that bringing a case does not mean that the court or the political forces, because the unfortunate thing, and again, Khaled will back me up on this, unfortunate thing about international law, it really does not have the power unless a major power acts upon it or there's a consensus. Case in point, the 5 permanent powers of the UN Security Council are the primary violators of international law. We are number 1, and we're often celebrated. We have had 222 wars, including invasions of foreign states, Iraq, right? That is sovereign, and international law was silenced because every time anybody will raise a point, will have the veto power. And same the Russians right now, they're having a veto power. China, whenever we talk about the Uyghurs, raises with the veto power. And I don't need to say anything about Great Britain, because it's no longer great, but it has actually established the norms of violation of international law. And then France as well, which is December 28th, France actually sent troops to Mali. Did anybody know? Did anybody know? Right? While they're talking about, or at least saying that Putin, you should not send troops to Ukraine, but they're sitting, dilly-dallying in the 14th Francophone countries, collecting gold and forcing these countries to put their deposit in France. So the unfortunate thing that the international law has good principles, some areas where need improvement, but it actually does not have the teeth, because the major violators, in essence, are sitting in there to be the judge, the jury, and sometimes literally the executioner of acts of genocide.
Thank you, Dr. Bazian. So since we're talking about international law, Khaled, I'm going to jump to you. What laws are most emblematic of structural Islamophobia in India and in Kashmir?
There's a lot. I'll name a mention. I'll name a couple that some of the panelists have already mentioned. People remember the Muslim ban here in the United States, right, which was upheld by the Supreme Court and obviously passed by executive order. So India has its own version of the Muslim ban, where it restricts naturalized citizenship specifically along religious lines. So 3 nations are listed on that ban, all Muslim majority countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. This was spearheaded by the Modi regime and is very emblematic of this Hindutva vision that is being led by the state. A second one that is obviously, proliferating in the media today are these situational hijab bans. And obviously the hijab bans are most prominent in places like France and here in nearby Quebec, which enacted its own ban in 2019. But in places like Karnataka, you're seeing the emergence of private and situational headscarf bans, which in my opinion, and I'm no India expert, but may foreshadow either provincial or state level legislation that restrict or at least curb the ability to wear the headscarf in that country. In Kashmir, in all of India, in fact, there's a law called the Unlawful Activities Political Act, which I was arrested under. Ironically enough, I haven't been to India in a long time, but under this law, a series of tweets that I released led to my arrest under this law. And this law, what it effectively does is it looks to not only chill political dissent and political organizing, more than that, it looks to criminalize any mode of political organizing on the part of Kashmiris, Indian Muslims, but also anybody who has anything oppositional to say against the state. So those are only three of a real laundry list of laws that the state and my co-panelists can bring to light some additional laws during the course of this discussion.
I want to continue another question for you. How is Islamophobia in India gendered, and how are women specifically victimized?
So I just wrote an academic article re-theorizing Islamophobia from a gendered perspective. And the unfortunate reality is when we talk about Islamophobia, we make the sort of masculine presumption that the principal victims and villains that are at play when we talk about Islamophobia are men, right? Specifically through this caricaturing of the terrorists, right? The terrorists is the specific or focal ways in which we think about the Islamophobic culprit, if you will. But we can see that the experience of Muslim women is dramatically different when state-sponsored Islamophobia is unleashed in places across the world, but specifically in India. And I think I bore mention of what was taking place in Karnataka, right? We're seeing gendered Islamophobia is distinct in the sense that the state engages in, like Professor Bazian mentioned earlier, the policing of women's bodies. That becomes the principal way in which the state engages in gendered Islamophobia by saying how a woman can dress and cannot dress, right? In India, which claims to be, right, it's marauding around the world, claiming to be the largest democracy in the world. And we know that the cornerstone of any democracy is what? The ability to practice your religion as you see fit, or to not profess a religion. Why is this cardinal right that is attached to any democracy being denied to Muslim women? And the way it's being manifested is through the erosion and the encroachment of the ability to Muslim women to express their religiosity in ways that that aligns with their spirituality.
Thank you, Khaled. Samina, I want to ask you, during our conversations today when we were preparing for the event, you mentioned that you participated in several congressional hearings. And one of the things that you mentioned was gendered Islamophobia and how they are trying to make the Indian women invisible. I wanted to see if you wanted to add a few comments to that.
Sure. So I think, like the other panelists said, this hijab ban is just another sequel to this genocidal language. And to me, this is the anti-Muslim hysteria with hijab ban has reached a whole new level now. And try to understand that this is symbolic. This is, making women, Muslim women, a target is highly symbolic in two ways. First, they're soft target. Second, they are considered honor of the family, right? So the idea is to, and then the other thing is that this approach has been tested and tried in France and Quebec and other places elsewhere. So this is a quick and a cheap means of demoralizing and invisibilizing the entire community. Now, let me highlight what the Hindutva forces are nervous about. They don't like to see hijabi doctors. They don't like to see hijabi engineers. They cannot stand hijabi entrepreneurs. They cannot stomach hijabi professionals. the fact is that Indian hijabi women and all over hijabi women, they're doing great. They have careers, they have families, they're just making a place for themselves. Hindutva forces cannot tolerate that. This is highly misogynistic and a patriarchy that they're so deeply rooted in the culture. So it's not easy for them to digest the progress that has been made by hijabi women. And one particular news that I saw in one of the Indian newspapers, in the Indian Express, I believe it was in the month of February, that it showed a significant upstick in Muslim women education. So Muslim women going to school. That to them is a concern in Karnataka, in the state of Karnataka. So what do? They prevent girls from going to school, right? It's a no-brainer for them. The easiest way to, you first, you demoralize the community, you invisibilize them, then you prevent them from going to school. And I'm just so dismayed, and it breaks my heart to see this. So when Taliban prevented women from and girls from going to school and colleges and universities, there was an uproar from the Western world. Where are the feminists now? Where is the Western media? Why this silence when this is going on in India with Muslim women? Why this silence? I just cannot understand that.
So, Samina, why should Americans care about what's going on in India?
Oh man, yes, we all should care about what's going on in India. So, a comment I often hear is that, we live in this country, we have careers, we are settled down here, we don't even have any families in India, so why should we care? Or the worst is happening elsewhere, so why does it matter? Well, let me break this down to you. It matters because, as Pieter said, RSS is here. Hindutva is here amongst us. If you recall, in March of 2020, no, on August 5th, 2020, there was a big celebration in New York City in the middle of Times Square. And this celebration happened, and this celebration was organized by Indian Americans. And this celebration was to commemorate a judicial decision that happened in India. And that decision was to allow the construction of a temple in place of a 16th century Babri mosque. So Indian Americans decided to celebrate this decision in the middle of a pandemic, when on that day, if you look up on the internet, 162,000 American lives were lost to COVID. We were trillions of dollars in debt. 20 million people were out of the workforce. In the middle of such a somber time of our lives, when we had lost neighbors and family members and jobs and this and that, Indian Americans decided to celebrate a judicial decision that celebrated construction of a temple over a mosque. Isn't that appalling? It is not foolish, but it is appalling and dangerous. And who was behind that? RSS and its friends, the overseas friends of BJP, and all the other parts of that chain that has already been discussed, the VHP and overseas friends of BJP, and Brother Khaled mentioned all the names, the family tree of RSS here. Then very recently, in February, there was, and you all know about Howdy Modi event, right? Everyone knows that when Modi came and hugged then President Trump, and there was all the hoopla about the friendship, US-American friendship, and this and that. Well, guess what? Just last month, there was a Howdy Yogi rally in Houston, which started from the city of Sugarland, ended in a Shiv Shakti temple in Hillcroft, Houston. And who is this yogi? He's the chief minister of the heartland of India, Uttar Pradesh. This person has worst history of human rights. He is a celebrated Islamophobe. He needs no introduction in the gallery of Islamophobes. So a group of Indian Americans thought about celebrating or supporting his rally for an election that is happening thousands of miles away, that Americans have no business whatsoever. But why this support rally in Houston for an election that doesn't even concern us? Because the problem is hate, this hateful agenda, this bigotry, this misogyny, which is here amongst us in the form of RSS and its friends. And that is why I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we got to get more involved. We got to take more interest. We got to speak up, because as I was talking to a friend and I was just mentioning something to her, and I said, it's the silence that makes emboldens these people, by virtue of which we become accomplices in that violence. And I was reminded of something that, so some time ago, I received an email from someone at a leadership position. And this email was clearly misogynistic, it was microaggression, it was professional harassment, and it was everything combined. And there were several people copied on that email, all men. No one said anything. Now I could have, and I shot back an email, but that's not the point here. I know how to take care of myself. I don't put up with any, you know what? But I said, oh no, if no one says anything, this sends the wrong message. This will be endorsed, this will be normalized, and this will become routine. And guess what? It did. And in my opinion, everyone who was copied in that email, did not say a word, is an accomplice.
Thank you, Samina. I normally never put anything about food. The food is served, you go and eat, but there's so much knowledge here. I would like to continue for another 10 minutes, and then we yes, I will come to you.
What's the relationship between the colonial sector of Palestine and SSS, RSS, India? So what's the parallel? Much on that, Palestine, Kashmir, India.
Is it directed to a particular speaker? Okay.
Well, actually, if you go onto our Islamophobia Center website, we did a whole report on India, Israel, and Islamophobia. There's this transnational connections and links that are there, fundings that are being moved, training. In the United States, we see the partnership that had been struck by some of the Hindu nationalist organizations and RSS supporters and AIPAC, the lobbying, the visits that take place between the leadership in India and Israel. So we see this as part of the transnational networks that are there, that continues to promote India as a model, or at least not a model, but at least to put it in civil society. So we need to be aware of those relationships and how those relationships are being mobilized with a very heavy dose of Islamophobia. So it's not coincidental. And similarly, you also see the relationship with European Islamophobes. And these relationships are being struck. Lastly, just for people, I'm an equal opportunity person, right? I take issue with Muslim countries that roll the red carpet for Modi, right? United Arab Emirates, betting him with all types of awards, getting him all types of, status. This we have to challenge also in the Muslim world, where they think their financial interest or whatever interest that is being aligned has to be challenged, because this is just completely unacceptable. And similarly in relations with China as well. So I think those lines have to be, we need to insist on a very clear approach when we're speaking about genocide, human rights violation, and not to waver on those issues. If somebody is uncomfortable, I have many therapists to recommend for people if they feel uncomfortable. I'm not in the business of therapy. I'm in the business of where human rights violations take place, genocide take place. I'm going to mention it. You should not act as being the therapist of the people's discomfort. Their discomfort is with the truth. Their discomfort with justice is not our business.
Thank you, Dr. Bazian. Are you still with the company for another panelist, or is he getting off? Cool. So going back to what Samina was saying, Pieter, I have a question for you. Why should Americans be concerned about the RSS BJP in India, and how does it affect us here in the US?
That's a good question. How does it affect us here in the US? Well, as Samina was mentioning, and actually it's relevant to note that this event that happened in Times Square, August 5, 2020, where it was organized by RSS in America groups in order to celebrate the, I believe, the laying of the foundation stone for this Hindu temple, which is being laid over the ruins of the Babri Mosque. That happened actually on August 5, which also happens to be the 1-year anniversary of the annexation of Kashmir. It was kind of a insult, injury. How's that? Yeah, insult to injury. Thank you. Insult to injury. The RSS regime, RSS BJP regime in India is heavily dependent and owes a great debt of gratitude to its affiliates here in America, especially tracing back to 2014. I don't know to what extent, but to a great extent, Modi's election in 2014 is due in part to the actions of the RSS BJP affiliates here in the United States. Specifically the Overseas Friends of the BJP, which I mentioned earlier, as well as the HSS, which is the name for the RSS equivalent here in America. What happened was Modi was elected to the prime ministership in 2014. And from about 2011 to 2012, 2 to 4 years before that, these groups in America, HSS and OFBJP, got together and started planning and strategizing and started holding training camps, including in Texas, in Houston, and started bringing BJP officials over to America to kind of give them instructions and guidance, and began organizing and mobilizing to eventually go over to India and work to get Modi and the BJP elected. And what happened was in 2014, these groups, these RSS in America groups from America, they organized phone banks, campaign phone banks of hundreds of people, Indian Americans, not Indian Indians, not people with Indian citizenship, but Indian Americans sitting on the phone in America, calling back to India, telling Indian voters, vote for the BJP. In addition to that, they also organized and mobilized thousands of people, and the exact numbers are not clear, but the public numbers are at least probably about 3,000 people of, again, Indian Americans, most of them American citizens, not Indian citizens, who were mobilized to travel from America to India to serve as boots on the ground, to canvass, knock on doors, run polling stations. Now, I mean, I like to flip this and say, can you imagine the outrage here in America if we had a lot of Americans that emigrated to Russia and they gave up their American citizenship, they settled in Russia, they became Russian citizens, but they didn't give up their love for the Republican Party. And so every election cycle, they would mobilize with their, in Russia, their friends of the Republican Party based in Moscow. And they would set up phone banks in Moscow and call American voters and say, vote for the Republican Party. And they would go a step further and they would send thousands of now Russian citizens who used to be Americans back to America to campaign, canvass, come knock on your door, and maybe even staff your local polling booth. I mean, would Americans be upset about that? So I'm getting a little bit off topic, a little bit, but one thing that really I still fail to understand is why Indians are not in India more outraged over this blatant interference in their sovereign sacred elections that has occurred. So can you remind me, I got a little bit off, why should Americans care? How does it impact Americans? Well, it impacts Americans, that's one reason, is because Americans are actually interfering in Indian elections. A lot of Americans have played a role in putting into power Narendra Modi and the BJP in India. It impacts Americans. Because those groups are using American free soil to organize those efforts, but they're also using American soil to do things like the HSS and the BJP and these other Hindu nationalist affiliates. They're doing things to serve as a propaganda mouthpiece in America to whitewash and legitimize the RSS BJP regime in India. They organize rallies throughout the country, stage rallies in support of various agenda items of the Modi regime. They organize counter rallies and counter protests, especially against Indian minority groups. I've seen this with my own eyes, against Muslim groups that are protesting various agenda items of the Modi regime. They apply political pressure to candidates, to elected officials who have the guts to dare to say something slightly critical of the human rights situation in India. They also, I mean, beyond influencing or pressurizing such elected officials, they also have helped to put certain people, candidates into office who are willing to advance the cause of the Modi regime and the RSS BJP in terms of American foreign policy, in terms of diverting American foreign policy from paying any attention to the human rights situation in India, who are willing to whitewash Modi and the RSS, BJP. You know, I mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard was a premier example of that. She's no longer in office. But, you know, I won't go into the details, but she was deep in the pockets of the RSS BJP. They, from my research, they created her congressional candidacy and helped her get into office from day one. And she paid them back for it, especially, and these are the same people that mobilized to from America get Modi elected in India. These are the same people that put her in office. And then these same people, she paid them back by embracing Modi when he came and helping to whitewash them. And I could go on and on about this, but yeah, let me hand this over to you.
This is around social media, and this question is for both Rohit and Khaled. Rohit, what role have traditional media and media such as Twitter, Facebook, and WhatsApp played in this situation? And from there, Khaled, if you could touch on how has social media been a potent tool to counter and expose Hindu supremacy?
Well, the legacy media in India is completely compromised at this point of time. And what has been remarkable is that all these magazines, which, in 2002, after the riots in Gujarat, for which Modi was eventually denied a visa, there was unanimity in all these publications that, Modi was guilty of what he was accused of, and he was divisive, whatever the case would ultimately pan out to be. But they're completely compromised. They're under pressure from the government, and they're staffed now with the most rabid and the most mediocre journalists. With social media and the internet, I said I worked in the internet industry, and I remember that moment. It seems like a naive moment now when people thought that the internet would be this, lead to this sort of wonderful new world, this utopia. Also have this techno-utopianism in Silicon Valley. And in some ways it has empowered minority groups. But in the Indian context, because of the pressure of the government, again, Facebook, Twitter, etc., are completely compromised. And WhatsApp, Facebook, and Twitter both have blood on their hands. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think that social media obviously has a lot of perils, but it has some benefits in the sense that, provides individuals who don't have platforms or don't have, the ability to speak and critique what's happening on the state level, to take to these new virtual forums and bring to light what's taking place in places like India. Obviously, it's being cracked down, as Professor Rohit has mentioned, but it enables us in places like the United States to speak on behalf of communities that whose free speech has been bludgeoned in India, Kashmir, and so on. So social media obviously is a perilous place, but it also affords great opportunity for people to speak on issues in ways that are transformative.
Just have one. How many people here work in the tech industry? If you work in the tech industry, raise your hand. I want you to fill a survey, because we have a survey on Muslims in the tech industry. Right, so I have a QR code. I could share it with you when we get to the food. We need the data in terms of Muslims inside the tech industry. We have some Muslims that have faced Islamophobic incidents inside the tech industry. People being asked to remove some of their social media posts and so on. And then also some of the topics that you're not able to speak about within your tech. The two highest one are Palestine and Hindutva. So again, this is already, we have about 200 surveys. I'm trying to reach to 500 surveys. So if you are able and can take the survey, please, I need the data. Without data, again, I'm high on feelings, but I can't do much with it. I need a set of data in order to say, here's what the data says. Then HR have to begin to do the work that is needed. So I want your data.
Thank you. The conversation can go on, but we have to be aware of the time. I would like to invite everybody to dinner now. I want to take the time to thank you all. This was very knowledgeable for me.
Did I see envelopes for donations? Yeah, please take a minute to fill the envelopes, because India Muslim Council is very important. Their work is very critical, but we can't do much without your donations and work, right? I am begging because it's a good, right? Is for you to actually donate and support the work. This is hard work, and it needs all of our collective contributions. So make sure to not to look at the envelope, but to fill it for me.
Thank you, everyone, for that reminder. Thank you. Folks, I'm just like the past president that wants to be the program, so I'm just going to step for a second right now. I want to take a moment to thank our wonderful panelists. A loud round of applause for our wonderful panelists, please. And another round of applause for
for my sister Fatima, who's been working at it for 2 whole months, and we'll put that together